I grew up evangelical. Altar calls, confessions of sin, baptism, and being born again were the way of life for me. Sharing the saving grace of Jesus occupied my every thought. I felt guilty if I didn't share the plan of salvation with random strangers I saw in elevators. My life was consumed with church, Bible study, worship music, and anxiety. Lots of anxiety. Evangelical doctrine is full of contradictions. Jesus loves everyone, but gay people deserve hell. Jesus was an immigrant, didn't have a place to lay his head, but immigrants need to go back to where they came from. All people are equal, unless you're a minority, or a woman, or anything other than a white man. It's almost like evangelicals read the words of Jesus, decided they could do better, and left him behind, leaving him to hang on the walls of their fellowship halls with his white skin and flowing blonde hair. But I didn't know better. I believed the version of Jesus that had been sold to me since birth. I believed that Jesus loved me, but that he had degrees of love, and it was my job to stay in the very clear path that had been chosen for me. Now that I've been out of the religion for over half a decade, I can see it for what it is. It's not a religion based on the life of a man who preached about selfless love and sacrifice. It's a political movement based on hatred, greed, and power. You may be wondering what all of this has to do with witchcraft. Actually, quite a lot. A friend of mine sent me a video on TikTok recently that made my brain start to spin, and that's when things started to click into place. The evangelical church follows Jesus, but it's not the Jesus that's represented in the Bible. The Jesus they follow is a creation unique to them. They created an egregore. Hi, my name is Carol. I'm a former Southern Baptist, and I'm finding my way back to the practices of my ancestors, following the path that's rooted in my DNA. On this podcast, I'll share the history of the folk magic of the region and share my practice as I learn and grow in knowledge. We'll talk to people from all walks of life who follow different paths of spirituality, looking for the commonalities and the way we're more alike than different. If you're searching for a way to connect to spirit, pick up your walking stick and let's get to exploring. The term egregore sounds like something straight out of an old cheesy drive-in horror movie. And the term has roots in a Greek word meaning to be aware of and to control. And it's the concept of a non-physical entity that arises from collective thoughts and emotions of a group of individuals. This may sound totally science fiction, even for a podcast about witchcraft. But let's dive in a little bit before you decide if I've finally jumped off the deep end. We understand that our thoughts can change our circumstances. I have a Post-it note stuck to my computer monitor that says, "Mistakes are normal. You'll be okay." I see it all day while I'm working. It's a constant reminder that even though I won't be perfect, I can still accomplish great things. You can thank my therapist for that. And it really does help me to remember that even when my Scorpio perfectionist comes out to play, I can still get the job done, even if it's not perfect. This is how our brains work. Our attitudes about situations can change things. It may not change the outcome, but it can change how we perceive the outcome and how we react to it. Side note, there's a massive misunderstanding about manifestation that can get almost evangelical if it's not controlled. Some folks will say that you can manifest wealth if you have the right intention, or if you write those intentions down a certain number of times a day, or if you spin in circles and chant a money spell. So people will set the intention that they have $1 million. They'll write it in journals, spin until they get dizzy, and demand the universe deposit money in their bank accounts, and they won't see a dime. Manifestation coaches will tell you that you're the problem, that you're not manifesting the right way, or your intention wasn't worded correctly, or some other garbage. Just like an evangelical will tell you that your grandma died of cancer because you didn't pray enough or you didn't have enough faith. Same garbage, different preacher. And this is why I warn you to be careful who you follow on social media. Anybody can tack up a witchy tapestry on their wall, set up a fog machine and crystals, and grab a tarot deck. But that doesn't mean they know anything. And it definitely doesn't mean that they have the keys to the universe or can tell you how to manifest anything into your life. Do I believe in manifestation? Sure. But more than that, I believe the universe seeks balance. And if what you're trying to manifest throws something out of balance, the universe will balance the scales at all costs. If I'm focused on putting $1 million in my bank account, that money has to come from somewhere. And if I'm not concerned with where it comes from, that creates an imbalance in myself. So instead of trying to manifest a tangible bank deposit, I focus on manifesting the direction I need to take in order to make financial growth possible. I manifest the changes I need to make in order to be more financially responsible. Instead of manifesting things that require change to occur to someone else, I manifest changes in myself. I followed a religion that preached free will, but also told stories about how people's free will was denied to them so God would get some glory. So I'm not about to manifest anything that would affect someone else's ability to make their own decisions. Now, back to egregores. Thoughts are powerful. Our lives are directed by our thoughts. Everything we do starts with a thought, whether we realize it or not. And this episode started as a thought that was put into my head by someone else that inspired me to do research. Thoughts run the universe. Thoughts become physical reality. An architect begins with a thought that is drawn out on a blueprint that then becomes a building. The building is the result of a thought being brought about by physical action. But it wouldn't exist if someone hadn't thought about it in the first place. So this is where egregores come into play. The theosophical viewpoint is that egregores are the collective mind of a religious community, but that's as far as it goes. It's just seen as a collective thought or belief system. In magical and occult traditions, egregores can take on an independent existence. Either way, the evangelical church worships one, and he's nothing like the historical Jesus they love to talk about. It also explains why the versions of Jesus that are talked about in different denominations are so radically different. The Southern Baptist Jesus is absolutely nothing like the Lutheran Jesus or the Presbyterian Jesus or the Catholic Jesus. And this blows the evangelical mind. They have convinced themselves that their Jesus is the correct Jesus, and nobody can convince them otherwise. And since the Southern Baptists account for a huge number of the evangelical movement, their Jesus is a straight white man who's cool with slavery, hates queer people, is a capitalist, and thinks women should stop talking. Which is very weird, since Jesus spent all of his time with a bunch of dudes, had a very close relationship with Mary Magdalene, preached socialism, and recognized that non-binary and trans people very much existed. And if you want Bible references for all of this, email me. The Christian view of Christ has morphed so much over time that he's barely recognizable anymore. And since there are thousands of denominations, there are thousands of versions of Jesus. Thousands of egregores out there influencing people to participate in some behavior that the Jesus of the Bible would find disgusting. All of this reminds me of the Percy Jackson book series. If you've never read it, read it. Rick Riordan is a genius when it comes to describing egregores. In the books, Percy learns that the Greek gods move where they perceive to be the most powerful society in the world, which is why they moved Mount Olympus to the top of the Empire State Building. If that's true, they've definitely moved on by now. But he also talks about how the gods can fade if people stop remembering them. Like Pan began to fade when nature started to be developed into shopping malls. Egregores depend on the collective consciousness of believers to keep them relevant. Without that belief, they become footnotes in history. Egregores exist outside of religion too. Corporations have their own unique vibes, and the people who work there begin to conform to a set of behaviors in order to fit in. They'll even start to police the actions of coworkers to ensure that the company culture stays intact. And let's not even get started on the collective thought centered around sports teams. Thoughts are like colds. They're easy to catch. So are egregores bad? Not necessarily, but they can grow past their point of origin, basically taking on a mind of their own. They can get out of control, just like a controlled burn can turn into a massive forest fire. Egregores can stifle individual thought, forcing believers to conform to a group's thinking or be kicked out. This is how cults stay in business, and it's also how they fall apart. After a while, it's harder and harder for the cult leader to maintain control of believers, especially when information is all around and easy to find. In my own experience, once a seed of doubt was planted, and I recognized the flaws of the evangelical Jesus, the dominoes started falling pretty quickly. We're seeing it now in people who are leaving the MAGA cult. Once a sliver of light can penetrate, it makes it easier to see all the flaws. All of this is human instinct. We're wired to look for community. We've inherited from our pre-human ancestors the necessity to belong to a group in order to survive. So we conform, even if what we conform to is harmful. This is why so many people who leave cults wind up in other cults. Now, this doesn't mean that all groups are bad or that we should avoid seeking out community. But it does mean that we need to protect ourselves from being influenced to a point of blind devotion. How do we do that? We learn to recognize when egregores exist, and we learn how to guard against them. Egregores can be beneficial. They can bring like-minded people together to create societal change, but they can also limit free thought and critical thinking by pressuring us to conform. If you're a part of a group or a movement that doesn't allow any expression of thought that doesn't perfectly align with the group, proceed with caution. True growth comes from listening to other viewpoints, researching other ways, and then seeing how those align with your own values. If this isn't encouraged, you'll grow stagnant. Or worse, you'll start behaving in ways that you normally wouldn't. Remember Mean Girls? Regina George held her little group by a very short leash, and if they went against her, she knew exactly how to reel them back in. I found an article on a website created by Angel Quintana called Sacred Anarchy. It does a great job of explaining this concept. She says, quote, "Understanding egregores becomes even more intriguing when considering their dual nature. On one hand, they can provide unity, identity, and a sense of purpose to those within the group. On the other hand, they can influence individual behavior, sometimes in ways that suppress personal sovereignty or critical thinking. Egregores thrive on the energy and devotion of their creators, meaning they can become powerful forces for cohesion or manipulation. This dynamic underscores their significance in shaping not just spiritual traditions, but also societal structures," end quote. Quintana goes on to say, quote, "The duality of egregores highlights the importance of mindfulness and intention in their creation and maintenance. While they can serve as powerful tools for unity, inspiration, and transformation, they can also limit autonomy and perpetuate destructive group dynamics if left unchecked. Understanding their role as psychic entities helps individuals and groups navigate the fine balance between collective synergy and individual sovereignty," end quote. Collective human thought is powerful, possibly the most powerful force in the universe. So how can you guard against an egregore? Well, the only way to avoid the concept completely is to avoid humanity altogether, which really isn't an option. So unless you plan on moving to a cabin in the woods, growing your own food, and never speaking to another living soul, and not having Wi-Fi, you're out of luck. Also, if you have an active imagination, you're capable of creating an egregore in your own mind that could eventually begin to control your thoughts and actions. I'll say it again. Thoughts have power. Lots of power. If you think you're under the influence of an egregore, there are ways to break that influence. Remember that you have autonomy over your own life. Use critical thinking to decide if the group you're part of respects individuality and welcomes opposing viewpoints. If not, it may be time to make your exit. Also, spend time alone. Become comfortable with your own company. Start your own personal discovery journey. Commit to shadow work and develop your own spiritual path. If you work with ancestors, deities, or guides, make sure you're involved in the process. Your spirit work should be your own. It shouldn't look like someone else's. This doesn't mean you can't work collectively, but it does mean that you need to choose your community with intention. Find people who share a purpose, but who value individuality and mutual respect. Don't get caught in an echo chamber. I started this podcast to journal my own journey through my spiritual awakening. I wanted to explore my Appalachian heritage and see where it intersected with the cultural beliefs of my Celtic ancestors. I needed to make sense of my blood and where I come from. I've made tons of discoveries since I started, and I know I'll continue to evolve as I continue to study and learn. One thing I'm working through is the understanding of how my life as a Southern Baptist wired my brain and the work I have to put in to unlearn all of the harmful lessons I was taught. That's why I'm so careful about what I share here. The last thing I want to do is tell you how to practice, what to believe, how to perform spell work, or how to meditate. I hope you take what I say and use it as an inspiration to do your own work. I never want to be seen as an authority on anything. I'm a student, just like you, and I want us to learn to navigate this big old universe together. I'm happy to share parts of my practice, but not if you'll use it as a word-for-word guide for your own. And this leads me to the purpose of the Patreon. I believe community is at the heart of everything, and technology allows us to form a community with people from all over the world. But it also presents a danger. It's easy to hide behind a computer screen and mask our true intentions. It's easy to develop a personality that only lives on social media. Creators on social media platforms work hard at developing an image that people will want to follow. But once the videos are posted, you have no clue how these people actually behave in real life. This happens in real life as well. I'm going to get personal here, but it's going to drive my point home. This is painful, but y'all need to know. When I was little, my dad didn't go to church with my mom and me. We lived in a little community outside of Middlesboro, Kentucky, called Clearfield. My grandpa pastored a little Baptist church, and my mom and I were there every time the doors were open. When we moved from that community to La Follette, Tennessee, Mom and I drove those winding roads back to my grandpa's church every Sunday, a trip that took over an hour, while my dad went fishing. My mom was the children's Sunday school teacher. The road to the church was more than winding. It snaked its way through the mountains, where the only thing that stopped you from sliding down the mountainside was a thin guardrail. When I was around 7 years old, a family in the church had an accident on that road. They took a curve too fast, swerved to miss an oncoming coal truck, and broke through the guardrail. One of my Sunday school classmates lost her life. My mom couldn't bring herself to drive that road again, so she told my father that if he would find a local church, she would go with him. My father had a fishing buddy that had been asking him to visit his church for a while, so that's what we did. And we spent almost 4 decades there. I sang my first solo at that church when I was 12. From that point on, I was called on to sing almost every Sunday. I spent every Sunday morning in the choir. I was in every Easter and Christmas cantata. I was invited to sing at revivals all around the country. Music became my identity. Our choir director was a close friend of my dad's, and he's the one who encouraged my father to pick his guitar again after many, many years. The guitar gave my dad a purpose. He began accompanying me, and we traveled to other churches together. In my 20s, the choir director asked for me to help with special events. He put me in charge of the Easter and Christmas cantatas and told me he was hoping I would take over as choir director one day. He would talk to me at church, and eventually he began calling me at home. At first, it was to discuss ideas for the choir, but it quickly turned into other conversations. He became fixated on another member's daughter, who was around 13 at the time. He would rant and rave to me over the phone that this child wore inappropriate clothing. He would talk about how short her skirts were and how that mother should be ashamed. These conversations made me extremely uncomfortable, but I listened without complaint. He was the choir director after all. He was in a position of authority over me. And in the Baptist church, that meant I was to listen and obey, no matter how uncomfortable I felt. He was sexualizing a child, and I was too naive and too indoctrinated to understand that. These almost daily phone calls went on for weeks. I dreaded hearing the phone ring, but I felt powerless to stop it. And then the subject matter changed again. He began telling me in graphic detail of a sexual encounter he had had with his wife. I don't know how long this conversation lasted, but after we hung up, I collapsed to the floor, absolutely stunned. My husband found me there when he came in from work. I broke down and told him what had happened, and then I threw up. My ex-husband is a man of action. He's military, so it's second nature. He was a deacon, so he called the chairman of the deacon board and told him what had happened. I remember being confused by this because I didn't understand what was happening. All I knew was that I felt dirty and ashamed, like I had done something wrong. The deacons met with the pastor, and they called the choir director in. I have no idea what they talked about because they never spoke to me at all. The next Sunday, the choir director stood in front of the church and through tears apologized to the church for behaving in a way that was inappropriate. Nobody knew what he was talking about because it was never revealed to the church. The pastor and the deacons decided that it was better to keep everyone in the dark. But I knew. The choir director's wife knew. So while he stood in front of the congregation, weeping about how sorry he was, his wife and I sat on opposite sides of the sanctuary, both of us alone, while the rest of the congregation surrounded him, prayed with him, and forgave him. They forgave him, and they didn't even know why. And things went back to normal. I was expected to sing in the choir like normal. I was expected to mind my manners, forgive and forget. It's been 25 years, so clearly I haven't forgotten anything. People can behave in horrible, disgusting ways when they think no one is looking. That person you follow on TikTok may say the perfect words, may make you feel like they love you and they'll always have your back, but they don't know you, and the chances are high that they don't care about you. You're a source of income for them. They depend on your likes and shares to boost their views, which is why I don't have a plan to become a coven leader. I'm here to tell my story, to share with you what I learn and how it affects my own life. I want you to do your own research, develop your own path and practice, and share what you learn along the way. This is the point of the Patreon. It's my hope that we can see communities develop on that platform and that people will begin to connect and share their experiences and beliefs. I want an open space where we can share ideas and look for ways we can work together. I want to see people make new friendships that can develop. If you want to share spells, tell us about a powerful meditation, or explain how to use crystals, you can. The Patreon may have my name on it, but it belongs to all of us. This is also why I'll be adding weekly live streams and housing it behind a paywall of $5 a month. If you want to join the free Patreon and be part of the free chats, that's fantastic. But if you're ready to get to the business of putting legs under your community and to just start developing your skills, live streams will allow us to do that. Once you join, you can send me your ideas, spells, or any other topics you want covered. Then we can see each other and get to know each other. We can begin to create a movement. And send me your ideas about what you'd like me to cover on this podcast. You can email me. If you're listening on Spotify, you can leave comments to me there or tag me in TikToks. We're nearing the end of the long winter. Spring is coming. Seeds will begin to grow and the world will wake up. Let's be part of that awakening together. Thank you so much for joining me on Solitary Magic. Until next time, may the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your fields until we meet again. May the goddess hold you in the hollow of her hands.